Release the Kraken!
Welcome back, fellow game designers. In our last video, we went ahead and transferred our animation to our Luigi character. In this one, we're going to go ahead and fix some of the broken bits. So for this, we're going to go ahead and just retime it because we're starting at 80. Now that's not really that big of a deal, but maybe your character gets this animation and you want to have it at a different point in time. Sometimes it's easier to just start at the beginning. So you can see, of course, we're at 80. We'll fix that. Over here on the hand, his hand is kind of broken and twisted. We got to fix that. In his leg, that doesn't look very healthy. You can see as he kicks, he gets this weird twist of the knee, and that's not that great either. Okay, so first off, we save our work. Go ahead and open up your animation graph editor. So Windows, Animations, Graph Editor. And we will select all of the joints here. So I'll go up and grab the root. And let's make sure we get it all. So select hierarchy. So now we have all of it. And retiming this actually isn't that difficult. All we're going to do is I'm going to go up to my graph editor, and I want to set this back to 1. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and let's see where 1 is. So I'll just drag this back to 1. Like so. Make sure it's at 1. With all of the joints selected, make sure they all are. You can then drag a selection over your animation. And there it is. To navigate this window, Alt middle mouse click lets you move it around. To move the animations as a group, make sure you're on your move tool or you're on your selection tool. Either one is okay, but if you have rotation or scale, you're going to get something weird. So make sure you're on either selection or your translation. Hold down the shift key and then middle mouse, you'll get a question mark, and then drag to the left. Okay. Be careful you don't move this animation up and down. Holding shift will make it easier to constrain, but if you made a mistake, you'll see it in the main window. So I'm just dragging this until the ends of this are touching. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. Alt, middle mouse to move. I'll zoom in a little bit better, and you can see the little dots here. This is the animation. Okay. Once again, I'm going to hold shift and middle mouse. I'll drag to the left until the first row of dots connects. Oops, I went too far. There we go. That is on there. Now my animation has been retimed. Look at that. I'm going to set this one back to 1. And I'll rescale that out. This one, I need to know where this one's ending. So if I go into here, middle mouse, I'll go over. I'll zoom in on the end here. Again, I'm holding Alt, middle mouse dragging. So there's the end. And I'll come up, and it looks like I end at, let's see, if I drag this over, that is at 161. So I'll change this to 161. There we go. So now I start at 1 and I end at 161. Now just be careful as you're moving this stuff. If you were to accidentally middle mouse drag this up or down, you might get some weirdness. That's crazy. Just be careful on what you're doing. Alright, so now that everything's retimed, let's go ahead and fix the first problem. If I go back to 0 or go back to 1, and we go into our side view, let me go ahead and move this over, we can see that our character is floating. The ground is at this red line here, but we don't want him to be floating. We want him to be on that ground line. So what do? Well, we could select the pelvis and make sure we're on our first frame. I'll get my move tool, and then I can just move that down like so. But I have to do that for every key. So I'll go over to the next key, and then I'll move it down. And then I'll go over to the next key, and then I'll move it down. Now you're probably noticing that that's not the most ideal method, right? Sure, I can go through and I can readjust each individual key, but there's got to be a better way. And you're right, there is. Every single one of these keys, since it was recorded using our motion capture data, each one is positioned relative to the next. So I can update all of them at once. So I'll hit Control-Z a couple times to go back to before. So that's back to where it was. And let's just isolate the joint that I care about. So if I were to select my character and get that pelvis joint, you can see that we have this up arrow, right? What axis does that up arrow talk to? Now your natural assumption is it would be talking to the Y axis because Y is up and down. And if we were in world selection, that would be true. The Y axis would be up and down. And you can use your world selection for this. However, you need to know the actual axis that this is moving on. Otherwise, you're going to get some confusion, and it's going to be harder to isolate what you're looking at here. For example, if I just want to see my z-axis, I can click that, and it'll show me just the z-axis. See? That's convenient, right? If I want to see my rotation x, I can see what rotate x is doing. If I want to see what my scale x is doing, I can see what scale x is doing. So I need to know what axis to look at. So what do? Well, I get my move tool, hold down the W key, left click, and then you can pick your axis to look at. So right now we're looking at world mode. I want to look at object, and that's going to change my widget. And you can see that my up arrow is actually my x-axis. The reason for that is when we set the orientation of our joints, we oriented everything so that the joint was pointing with its x-axis to the next joint in the chain, right? So that means that from that joint's perspective, x is its up. All right? You need to know this so that you can modify the joints correctly. If I were to grab a different joint and it had a different orientation, it might be a problem. So just be aware of that. So now that I know the up axis for this joint is my x, I'm going to go ahead and isolate the movement by hitting X. So this is all of the up and down movement of this particular joint. And if I move this joint, of course it moves everything else, because everything is a child of the pelvis, with the exception of the root. The root is its own thing. So now that I have that, let's go ahead and maximize window here, and I will just select all of those keys. And let's go ahead and take a look at this in the side view. So with all of those keys selected, I can very easily just move this up or down, like so, up or down. And if I were to animate, the animation is going to be relative to that position, because all of those keys were captured very close to each other. So any time that they change, it's relative to the next position. So let me go ahead and just put him back to where he was. And then I'm going to hold down Shift. That way I don't accidentally drag it in the wrong way. And then I will middle mouse and I will drag down. And I'll just make it to where it looks like he's on the ground. That's pretty good. And check it out. If I were to play from there, his animation has been adjusted and everything is lined up relative to the last key near the ground. I'll go ahead and stop that. Let's go ahead and look at something else. Let's take a look at this leg. So at the beginning, Luigi's leg is here. Go ahead and grab it. You can see that that leg is kind of skewed. It's pointing off. But that's just an issue with the animation capture. So one of the sensors was giving us a bad signal, and it was pointing a little bit weird. So sometimes you have to fix it. It's actually easier just to recapture the animation, but let's say you didn't have that. The system, you're in a studio and you only have one suit, and now it's being used by somebody else and you can't get to it. Or that animation was sent to you from a different studio and you don't have direct access. Well, you're going to have to fix it one way or another, right? Easy enough. I'm going to go through one joint at a time and just fix it. So here's this one. And I know that from this stance, Luigi should have a mostly forward-facing leg. So I'm going to go and find the axis to rotate on to get this to point forward. So I hit my rotation tool, so E. And that looks like it is in world rotation. So I'm going to hold down the E key, left click, and you can see that we are in world rotation. But I want to be in object rotation. So I'll go ahead and click the object, and you can see how that's been skewed. And I need to rotate this so it points forward, but look at which axis I have to grab. Do you see that? I have to grab this axis here. This is my x-axis. Okay. So I'm going to come over and isolate my x-axis on here. So rotate x. This is my rotation data for the x-axis. And I can visually take a look at how that's going to point. So I'll grab all them. Make sure I have all that. And I want this to point forward, right? So I'll hold down my shift key. And our animation, just so you're aware, the direction going left and right, this is time, okay? The direction going up and down, this is the value that that joint currently has. It can have a positive value or a negative value, right? So as I move this up or down in value, so again holding shift middle mouse, as I move up or down in value, I'm actually rotating that joint, okay? As I get closer to 0, I'm actually getting closer to the front. So I'm going to come into here, make sure I have all those selected, and I'm going to shift middle mouse drag down and get this close to 0. It doesn't have to be exactly at 0, but it's got to be close to 0. And I can see where that's pointing, and that's pointing pretty straight, right? I still want to have somewhat of a natural position, so I can be a little bit away from 0 one way or the other, whatever looks more natural. Okay, so that's probably pretty good. And again, since all of those keys were captured with motion capture, their positions are all relative to where they are on that timeline. So I can just move it, and as I move forward, you can see that is a much better position. That leg is mostly forward as he's crouching, and then as that hip moves out, you can see that, right? But now we have another issue, that knee. We got to fix that knee. So what do? Well, we're going to go down to the next joint. Again, I will grab that knee, bring up my rotation. You can change the size of the rotation handle by pressing plus or minus. And now I want the knee to mostly face forward. I'm going to get the rotation X data. I'll get that. Hold shift, middle mouse, and I will drag down to orient that mostly forward. Again, approaching 0. Whatever looks most natural to you, I'm going to get it just about 0. Okay? Let's see how that looks. He's bending. He's crouching. Yeah. Now this leg is kind of sliding off unnaturally outward, so I'll have to fix that. And then as he kicks, that looks pretty good. And he kicks out, it kind of twists a bit weird. And does this weird swooping motion. And then kind of comes back, right? So let's take a look at this farther down the line. As I get to about here, which axis determines its tilt, left and right? Well, from here, this green axis, that's our Y. So I'll isolate my rotate Y. Now from here at 0, this rotate Y looks pretty good. But as I get farther and farther down, it starts to do some weird stuff, right? So this is where I have to get more creative, because now I can't just adjust everything as a group. I have to be a little bit more picky. So in here, I'm gonna zoom in on the section that gets really weird. And as I'm going down this, you can see it gets really bent, sort of off. So maybe I'll take these points here from... Let's see, where exactly do you start being weird? Looks like that happens right about there. Okay, so I'm at frame 20. I'll grab that one. Maybe through here. Okay. Since I don't know exactly where that needs to be, I can just kind of eyeball it. So for here, go ahead and just go ahead and middle mouse click. Again, holding shift. That goes there. I want to rotate this so it's a little bit straighter. Like that. Now I am going to get some weirdness here, so I have to be very careful. And that's less weird. You can see here, we get this really sharp upward tick. So maybe I'll take this frame and that one, and maybe I'll just delete those off. Let's see where those go. A little better. That's going in. I don't mind that as much. Let's see where we are. Are we past this little bump in the road here? Those two, it's a bit of a jitter, but I can do kind of the same thing. I can take this one and maybe this one. Maybe I don't need those. I can move this one to smooth out that transition. And then we have some really sharp points right here. So let's go forward a little bit. Still not too bad. I don't mind that too much. We'll continue forward, and that swoops up. So up and kick. That knee is coming up. We got the kick. And then we got this weird knee kind of going back in there. So let's see what's going on here. So like that part is really on the hip. So I'd have to go back and fix the hip. But I'm going to keep going forward and just fix where this foot is. So next on the foot here, I'll go down to the next joint. And again, you can see how this is a bit weird. So let's go back to the beginning. And that joint is mostly okay. But you can see how it's tilted on the heel. So let's do this. Let's go and find that axis. Looks like it's the X. I'll grab its X. Again, we're going to isolate that curve and move it so it is mostly forward. Again, approaching 0. Let's see what happens as we go forward. The leg is bending. And then this is a little broken there. Look how skewed that is on there. That's that Y. If I adjust that down just a little bit to make that leg straighter, I'm on 65. Let's see where that's at over here. You can see how that's really extreme on that. So let's say we have something that's really off. So right about there. Go back just a little bit. Let's say I want that to be a lot straighter. Where's that joint? Or that frame here? That guy. And let's make sure I'm actually on the correct rotation. So I'm going to rotate Y. And I'll grab that particular joint or frame. And then shift middle mouse. That moves it up to here. And you can see how much of a change is going to be. So from here, so I'm going to go ahead and just snip off these 3 frames here and see what the rotation works out to be. And that's a lot nicer. So from here up, and that rotation's better here. And that does something weird there and then gets really extreme over here. Go ahead and just pull these ones off. Just snip it up. Get that one as well. And really, you can see how this is dipping into a lot of the weird territory. So what if I go through and just snip out that line? You can see that changes a great deal of how that is going to be bent. The arc is a little bit smoother. That's a lot more natural. It isn't perfect by any means, but we're getting closer to something useful. So we hit, and then he's bringing the foot back. Bam. And then bringing back. And of course there's more that I could totally do on the leg. Let's go ahead and move on to the hand. So I'll jump out and grab this hand joint. Where are we at? The wrist. Go ahead and grab that. If I scroll down, you can see I have the right wrist. Now that right wrist, that's another bad sensor. It really wasn't being captured well. We could go through all the steps we've done here. We can go back and try to just orient this wrist, find the correct orientation for it. But sometimes you're going to have animations that is just no good. And in this case, we have animations that are just no good. So I'm going to grab the wrist, so right wrist, and I'm going to go ahead and shift down through all of the right fingers. So right wrist all the way through to the right pinky. You can see that here. Right wrist, there's the thumb, index finger, middle finger, ring finger, pinky. So all those are captured. I'm going to grab all the animation, and I'll just delete it. So all of the frames for that selection have been removed. Okay. I'm going to go back to the channel box. Go in here, select all zeros for the rotation. Do not cancel out the translations. Those have to stay. But I'll go to the rotations, set those to 0, and you can see that snaps it back to its default pose. Okay, and then I can just animate this by hand because not a whole lot really happens here. The wrist bends according to the elbow, right? So if I need to add in, maybe this comes down, and at some point the fingers bend, I can do that manually. So I'll take what we've got here, I'll just set a key. So that's setting keys for all. And then when we come back up, down here, whatever the current position is, I'll just set the keys there. And again, it should be nothing because there's no animation on it. You can see nothing's really happening here, nothing here. But maybe right around frame 20, maybe I want the wrist to bend a little bit. And maybe I want the fingers to all close. So I'll get fingers. And if you had set up animations for the fingers, you could just do that here. I'll make sure to just grab this one back here. I just use shift and then clicked, and I'll just make a fist. And I'll clean up that thumb. Move that. That joint's a bit weird, but it's alright. We'll just fix it. Okay, so I'll grab those fingers again. And then I'll just key it by hitting S. So we're going into a fist. and then through his animation, bam, and then as he comes back up, he kind of relaxes that hand, right? And maybe I'll let this hand relax too. This hand stayed as a fist. Actually, I'll keep the other hand as a fist. So I'll go ahead and just go all the way to the end here. I'll grab this one and then delete. So that'll be a fist there. Then I'll just hit S to make sure I key it back. It's going to be a static key because nothing really changed. But now we have a fix on that hand. And really anything that is so broken that you have to go through and do a correction that is that severe, you can do that. So like on the knee here, if it's really a bother that it's going way out of character, you can cut off the part that you don't need and you can just reanimate by hand. And there's no harm in that. Okay, but I think this is a lot better for just a few minutes of working on it. So I'm going to go ahead and call the video here. And if your animations need more cleaning up, the more time you put into it, the better it's going to look. All right, so save your work, stay tuned, and I shall see you next time. Hey guys, thank you for checking out my channel. Misty and I both thank you. If you enjoyed that video you just watched, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Or if you want to support the channel, check me out on Patreon or pick up one of my books, Life and Times of Dinah Marton or The Guardian's Path of Ascension. Speaking of which, I'm converting The Guardians into a graphic novel / comic book series. Here is a sneak peek. My wonderful artist, Patrick, is doing a great job. I'm excited. I want to push this out as soon as possible. So definitely keep your ears and eyes open for that. I'll be making announcements as we get closer, and I'll post some shots of that as we go. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can check me out on Twitter. I guess now it's X. Who does that? It's BruceRF1 at Twitter, or at whatever the new thing for Twitter is. Anyway, hopefully see you there, and I'll see you guys next time.